So hi, everyone. Welcome to our afternoon session on this second day of Cyberweek. My name is Colin Rule. I'm your host. Delighted to be here with my good friend, Darren Gingras from CSD. I keep pronouncing it wrong. How do I pronounce it? CSD. CSD, right. Because, and I just learned this, I put two and two together when we were at the ODR conference in Williamsburg. Darren has also done work with a group called Common Sense Divorce. So that's Common Sense Divorce, CSD, and then you look at CSD. So there's a lot of clever stuff here, you got to pay attention to pick it up. But Darren's one of the biggest thinkers I know of in dispute resolution. He's been doing this for a long time. I think that, CSD is the thought leader in terms of online dispute resolution and divorce and family disputes in Canada. He's based in Ontario. And we've been chatting with each other, gosh, it's got to be almost 10 years at this point, Darren. So
it's been a while.
I'm really delighted that you are going to take some time and walk us through some of the exciting stuff that you guys have been doing. So thank you so much. So with that, why don't I just hand it over to you and you can drive.
Well, thanks very much, Colin. And just so I know that everybody's able to see me, hear me, can I just make sure that everybody's going to see my screen? You really don't want to be looking at this ugly face. You want to be looking at what I've done on my screen.
Well, you're too humble, but yes, we can see it and hear you clearly.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, to start off, I'm just going to make sure that this is not on my screen. Really quickly want to introduce again our company, CSD Dispute Resolution Technologies. And my name is, no, now my screen is not working. I think I need to share once more. Let's see if that's working now. Oh, goodness gracious, Colin.
Nope, no luck. Let me see here. Okay. Let me try. Make sure you're host. Yep, you are the host.
There we go.
There we go. We got it.
Okay, and just introducing me with a lovely Photoshop photo that makes me look much more handsome. My name is Darren Gingras. I'm the Executive Director over at CSD Dispute Resolution. We've been working on this as a team now full time. We come out of, as Colin said, an existing family mediation process. And we've been working on the technology component now for going on 5 years, full time for the last 4 years. And we are a team that's running out of the IBM innovation process. So we're at the IBM Center here in Toronto, Canada, and part of the innovation program with IBM. And specifically, if you're looking for my contact information, I'll give you that information at the end of the process. The thing that we are very specific about, and very much upfront about what it is that we do in our work with family, with ODR, is we only work in family law ODR. And there are times I have to tell people I didn't go through a nasty divorce. I didn't end up somehow in this process because of some terrible scenario that I have. It seems to have found me. And it's something that we've become very, very passionate about. And so we are very specific that we only work on the development of family law ODR. And I always have to precursor this one with the starting. I have to tell people what it is that we don't do, just to make sure that everyone's with me as we go through this process. We do not do online do-it-yourself divorces. That is not what we're about. We're not in any way trying to get involved in that process. No statement about anybody that's working in that process. That's just not what it is that we do. We specifically, coming out of a family law mediation process, one of our specific agendas in family mediation is, of course, understanding the complexity that is family law. So we realize with family law that there is so much complexity going on, and fundamentally, often where I find ODR processes broke down is that it doesn't really play out in family law processes where individuals going through these processes really are not working first and foremost from a rational emotional space, but they're working through very emotional spaces. And we're dealing with all kinds of very profound complexities. In this one, we adopted a process. We basically got into what's called the science of complexity, and simplified. The science of complexity is about taking very, very complex processes, breaking them down into smaller and smaller and smaller entities, and basically trying to deal with each entity, each pain point. And that's what you're going to hear me talking about today, is the pain points that we were finding in family law processes, and specifically is how they played out in family law ODR processes. So we deal with the simplifying of these pain points, and ultimately taking those pain points and trying to glue them back together. Fundamentally, we're not the ones that are creating the onboarding ODR processes that go start to finish. We very specifically deal with those specific components, and then we would work with the other existing ODR platforms and processes to be able to deal with the pain points of family law. So having said that one, I always sort of like to start off with my own definition of what I mean when we talk about online dispute resolution. And coming from Canada, where of course French is our back language, it's all about accent aigu. So I know a lot of times in online dispute resolution processes, the emphasis can go on the online. For us in the family law processes, we really have to put that emphasis on the dispute resolution. And in that one, what really is an intrigue to us is ODR as a technology that obviously not only facilitates the online resolution of disputes, but we're really interested in that ADR process, how we can address and respond and resolve the core issues of that dispute. In that one, how do we deal with those pain points? And as we've been looking at this one, it really started to intrigue us at the beginning of this process of how technology could be used as an ADR technique. How technology could be used, for instance, to just facilitate the way that we receive and process information. We were interested in how technology could help us to screen or identify for domestic violence processes. Could technology somehow be used to deal with power imbalances, or something as simple as technology? Can it help us to deal with avoidant individuals? Now, for us, what this meant then is that we went into other industries. And one of the nice things about the work that we were doing is we've been funded by the National Research Council of Canada. And we had an opportunity to take at least a good year, if not 2 years, and go to visit what was happening in other technologies and other industries. So we were interested, to find out what was happening in design and client-centric processes that were happening, for instance, in healthcare. We learned a lot about healthcare and pain management from healthcare technology. My favorite story on this one, I always like to tell this one, I had to go in for surgery about a year ago. And when I went into surgery, the first thing that they did at intake was they clicked a little button to my pajamas that was sending out texts. And what it would do is it would send a text to my wife, who was 2 hours away, and more importantly to my mother, who was on the other end of the country. And the text would say, Darren has now gone from intake to pre-op. Darren has now gone from pre-op into surgery. Then it would send another text saying Darren is out of surgery and Darren is now in recovery. And then it would send another text saying, not only is Darren out of recovery, he's doing well, and he's been moved up to room number 819. Now, we may not necessarily think of that as a dispute resolution technology, but for us, this was really intriguing. I thought, first and foremost, you people obviously know my mother, because the reality on this situation, without this kind of text process, my mother would have been bogging down the entire 1-800 customer service line, finding out what was going on with her baby. And in that one, that really intrigued us, that whole thought process of using technology ahead of a drama, ahead of a pain point, and actually resolving that dispute or resolving that crisis point before it even originated. So not only were we looking at pain management processes and client management processes out of healthcare, we learned a lot from fintech. We went into the banking industry, and we really spent a lot of time understanding what was going on in the banking industry. And they taught me a lot about the utilitarian use of data as opposed to the behavioral augmentation. And what this means, and let me give you an example. If you think of your online bank, long ago, they have learned how to use that utilitarian data. You have X amount of dollars in your bank account. You can log in online, see how much money that you have, and they can push a button and transfer that money to another bank account. We can pay our bills online, et cetera, et cetera. What we were really intrigued though in fintech was we were starting to see them work with behavioral scientists and get involved in what's called behavioral augmentation. In other words, they were really interested, can we use technology not just to move the data and the digits around, but can we use technology, for instance, to turn people into savers? Can we use technology to help people to fix their credit? Can we use technology and implement processes that were helping people to reduce their debt or plan for retirement? And this whole thought process of behavioral augmentation became incredibly interesting and exciting to us. So that became the premise of what we were looking for in our dispute resolution, our little pain point definition of dispute resolution for family law. We were really interested in how we could connect and manage data better to generate better solutions. And more importantly, if we could use data, or if we could use technology to shape the way that people were making behavioral-based decisions in family law processes. So for us, that what sent us back to the drawing board. And of course, again, working in that whole thought process of complexity, we started breaking down our existing family law process. The nice thing about this is we have a very, very large ADR and mediation company here in Ontario. So we were able to learn a lot while working with existing clients. And the nice thing that was really positive for us as well is that we had both sides. So we were able to learn incredible amounts of detail from these clients that we were working with. So we started breaking down, and the first thing we did is breaking down the whole thought of a family law process into 4 quarters, looking at what we called system efficiencies, professional services, client care, and then of course court integration. And then we went into that, breaking it down, those pain points even further. And for us, it started to look like this one. We created a process that we could start working on individual pain points. And very honestly, at the beginning, they were little pain point solutions, technologies sitting out there in the universe, not necessarily connected to each other, but certainly, you know, accomplishing the purpose of what it is that we were looking for. So we launched something, we called it Odin, and we kind of laugh at that one. Odin is the Norse god, what is it, with regards to knowledge, and the Norse god with regards to war. We figured that about covers divorce. And we use Odin as our central hub. It's our database. It is our data warehouse, if you will, where we are connecting all of these various processes together. And that's what it is that we're doing with our Odin. So really quickly, what I'd like to do is I'd like you to walk really quickly through some of the processes that we've actually created and developed. Everything that we're talking about today is not conceptual. We actually have these up and running. We've had probably to date, depending on the processes, we've had approximately 6,000 to 7,000 individuals go through various parts of the processes. Obviously, again, we don't do end to end, so we have not walked anybody from necessarily one digital end of a divorce to the other end. But in various capacities, we've had numerous people that are going through our processes. So I want to give you an idea of some of the things that we've been building, and more importantly, the pain points that we're learning as we go through the process. For us, where we wanted to start, most naturally played out when it came to triage. And there's a number of different triage systems that exist in the world around us. We know that, you know, for instance, various law societies are creating pathways. There's a number of different processes where you can go online and find out information. We were interested, of course, in playing with the triage process, not so much about providing information. We kind of realized right from the beginning that the challenge when it comes to family law is not that there's not information out there. Part of the problem is that there's too much information out there. And in this one, anybody with a Google was being led to laws that were applicable in Louisiana, but not necessarily applicable in Manitoba or not applicable in Ontario. So with that one, we really were interested in creating triage as a process that more or less for us was highlighting complexities. That's what we were really interested in the beginning. So in other words, could we highlight pain points potentially that a client could be facing as they were going through that process? Obviously give them access to information, but more importantly, we were really interested in whether or not we could create triage as something that was a persuader, something that could actually nudge people in a certain direction or another direction based on the data that they were giving us in that triage process. And what was really interesting as we started to get the feedback from clients going through this triage process is we learned a lot about process. And of course, my PowerPoint right here is doing funny things. But I like to use the example of this is something that we learned. We talk pain points. So you're going to hear me talking about pain points. It's not enough to figure out this end-to-end process if we can't deal with a pain point. And the way that I like to explain this pain point has to do with the idea of giving directions. So when we talk about giving directions, it seems quite straightforward. You know, we want to give directions to somebody that's trying to get from here to there. And many times when we think about triage, that's really what it is. We're wanting to give directions. We're wanting to provide information to be able to get people from one place to another. The trouble with directions, though, is that, there's different ways of giving directions. You think about it, remember the old days when grandpa would say to us, okay, if you want to get to our house, make sure you just drive past, the red tractor on the right-hand side and go up about a mile and then turn left at the tree and go down past the cow and you're going to find our house. Well, it's definitely directions, but of course we all know how well that worked in the days gone past. And of course, those directions, of course, have moved to things like written directions. And for many individuals, this is the way that we're seeing the existing triage processes. It is written directions. The challenge with written directions, though, is if you think of other areas in our lives that we learn. Oh my goodness, my computer's doing something there. If you think of other areas in our life where we learn things, we learn through different ways. The written word is actually really difficult. In school, you don't sit there and just read all the time. So this was one of the processes where we started looking and bringing in educators, people who understand how to communicate, behavioral scientists, and say, talk to us about how we give directions. So we wanted to get beyond just simple directions where we were explaining to people. And going back to the analogy, you think about it, there's the map. Well, a map definitely gives you a much better sense of where you're starting, where you're finishing. You might have a direction of where it is that you're going. But again, we've always realized that the biggest thing that you're looking for when you're trying to get somewhere is where am I now? The maps don't tell you necessarily where you are now. We've seen technology play out in directions. And, this has started playing into things like Google Maps. Isn't that a wonderful thing? When Google Maps came out, all of a sudden they could give us a map that would tell us how to get from Toronto to Montreal, and we could plug it into our car. And as we were driving, it would literally say to us, turn right in the next corner, turn left in 300 meters, sorry, in the United States, in 300 yards, you're going to have to turn right, whatever it might be. But even more interesting with this one is, for instance, the way that technology has developed to my favorite app, and that is, Waze. What's interesting with Waze is it starts to highlight from data that's coming from individuals the hazards that might be on the road. So I know you want to get from Toronto to Montreal, but there's a huge traffic jam around Kingston, Ontario, or there is a breakdown on the side of the road, or there's an accident, whatever it might be. And you start to realize that map has now become interactive. My point with all of this one is to sort of point out that there's numerous ways to give directions, but each one of them is a very, very different process. And that's what it is that we've been looking at when we've been trying to look at triage, is how we can be playing with a process in a very different way. In other words, how can we communicate information that's not just about how do I get from here to there, but actually potentially can start highlighting hazards that could be in the road ahead of them, giving them direction, helping them to understand where they are on that point, and actually leading people to where it is that they're going. For us, this meant that we moved into another area, and I'm going to talk about very quickly. It's what we call our professional tools. When we launched, we had a number of individuals, a number of organizations that were coming to us, and they were asking for assistance. So we work, for instance, with organizations like the Ontario Association of Family Mediators or the Collaborative Practices here in Ontario. And in this one, they were coming to us and they started asking us about various solutions to pain points that they were having. And what we were hearing from them, the trouble when people tell you what it is that they want, especially when it comes to technologies, you really have to listen really carefully to what it is that they are saying. So in other words, what they want probably uncovers dozens of different pain points along the way. So in other words, you can create it, but if we're not fixing those individual cogs. And what we were hearing from these individuals that were coming to us as far as professional tools, the number one thing that we were being asked is we spent time and we were saying, talk to us. What is it that you're looking for? And we were getting great feedback from numerous professionals. What's causing the most difficulty? What's causing the most confusion? And they were giving us their feedback. With that one, then, we were trying to create, and we started out our process again, each one of these individual little silos that were working independently, trying to create processes that would specifically deal with one individual pain point, one individual cog of the family law process. We'll leave it to the big guys out of California to figure out the end-to-end. Our job is just to deal with these individual pain points. And we understood that, professionals were looking for tools that could cover a very wide spectrum of professionals. So it wasn't just about creating tools that were for lawyers. We needed tools that also worked for very different processes, for mediators, for financial professionals, certified divorce financial analysts, and lawyers, tools that would work with very, very different skill sets. But not only that one, we also had to look with the whole idea of how do we connect these professionals together. They were asking tools that allowed them to be able to collaborate on various processes together. So our first job was to relearn what it is that we've already learned. So we went back to our triage process and we started playing with the idea, could we repackage what it is that we've done? Can we repurpose? Could we glue together what it is that we've learned in previous processes? Could we learn what we learned about intuitive language, intuitive questionnaires, so that we could walk people through various processes? And in that one, it led us basically to the implementation of various kinds of intake processes and client questionnaires or domestic violence screening. Different iterations of that triage process now become part of a client intake process. And for collaborative professionals, that meant, of course, lining them up on a client dashboard where they could work together. What became interesting for us, and this is on our radar right now, is integrating these processes. You will probably find when you're looking at family law technologies, all kinds of different technologies existing around the globe. Software that is taking care of client management, software that's taking care of billing, client software that is taking care of generating those divorce documents, the separation agreements, hot docs, whatever it might be. So we definitely been working with API integrations that allow us to integrate these kind of dashboards and processes into other processes so that we are now bringing them together and gluing these points together. What professionals were asking us for, though, was a better way to collaborate with other professionals. So in this one, what it meant is that we had to create a process where clients that were working together, and again, if anything we've learned, simple processes are not simple, and simplicity is certainly not simple. So in this one, we were looking for a simple collaborative process that would allow that client that was on your dashboard to be shared with other professionals depending on what it is that they were doing. And in that one, we call it a handshake process. They were looking for something where not only were they able to collaborate, but they were sharing the same information. One of the big challenges for family law is that people are working off different documents, different generated separation agreements, different net family property statements, and many times there's great confusion of what it is that people are working with. So that was our first process for the Ontario Association of Family Mediators, was to create a collaborative process. The next thing that they started coming to us and they said, okay, this is great. Can you somehow create a tool for us? A pain point that we are having is a way that we can marry multiple files together. How do we marry together the data from one client so that they can be working visually with another client? And this wasn't just mediators that were having this process. We were hearing, of course, from lawyers and CDFAs that was asking for ways that not only could they bring this data together, that they could visually deal with this data. Security, obviously a big issue. We're working out of IBM and they are great in assisting us through our security issues. We created what we call a negotiation room. Security issue, this is done so that, for instance, you may not want to share all of the data. You may just want to collaborate specifically on this negotiation room. We do it through a process of copying keys, and sharing that key is locking a negotiation room. We've integrated a process with Watson, so IBM Watson, that allows us to analyze data and automatically marry together. For instance, it's automatically looking for joint accounts, finding information that's been detected as similar, and completing them together onto a joint process. Now, this was great. The challenge with this one, though, is it immediately implemented and showed to us another pain point. We wanted to go straight from here into generating the court documents, but what we were hearing from people is that these pain points were coming back, that clients are afraid of documents. They're especially afraid of legal documents, and reviewing legal documents was creating a pain point for ADR processes. It was a hindrance to individuals that were trying to negotiate. They were seeing something that wasn't necessarily on the point. So in that one, obviously, we wanted to be able to generate the legal documents, but these documents was overwhelming to clients. And it was creating in that process a pain point that we finally concluded was not necessary for that part of the negotiation process. So what we wanted to do is we started playing things with like visualization, trying to help people to understand that more is not necessarily better. You know, when you're looking in family law deals, everybody, of course, is wanting more alimony, more support, more child support, whatever it is. But they forget about the taxes. You might actually be getting more, but that's actually changing what it is that you might be taking home. We also found another pain point that was coming with this one. We call it bag lady syndrome, or the male version of this one is street guy syndrome. As people were going through these process, what we were fundamentally dealing with as people were dividing their assets was this overwhelming angst that they were going to be living on the streets, that if this money was not dealt with in the right way, that I'm not going to have any money, I'm going to be a bag lady. And we really had to think about this process. And that's, of course, why we started playing with visualizations and creating, you know, for instance, a virtual net family property statement or a division of assets statement that could be put on a screen and actually shared with the clients. And therefore, when they're coming in with for negotiations, either in a mediation process, a collaborative process, whatever it might be, you can actually interact with your clients, and the professional can interact with the clients in a very different way. What was wonderful about this one, though, is we started getting what we call implementation nuggets. And these are these little moments where we learn something really incredibly wonderful about a process, not because we set out to learn it or even to deal with it, but in going through a new process, a new innovative process, some kind of positive implications were coming out of it. So for instance, even when we talked about creating a screen where people could sit in front of this screen and do the negotiations, a little implication that we learned with regards to ADR is that when there's a big screen on the side of the room, people tend to sit back and move away from each other when it comes to actually negotiating and looking at what's on the screen. And a silly little implication, when it was a smaller computer screen that were working in front of people, people tended to lean in and the communication was very different. So this is the kind of things that we're looking for, dispute resolution technologies and dispute resolution solutions, implications that we were obviously dealing with very specific situations. The next thing that started to play out with, of course, is clients were asking us to get into a review process, whatever it is. The professionals were asking us for a review process, be it financial documents, be it documents submitted, be it digital e-discovery documents, whatever was going on. Clients were asking for a way to review these processes. And for us, what this meant is that we got into basically what is our greatest success so far to date. We were asked to develop for the Ontario Associations of Family Mediators an online financial disclosure process. Now, if you're in family law, you know that financial disclosure is the pain point of pain points when it comes to the process. I tell our clients that have to go through the process that financial disclosure is the colonoscopy. Nobody likes doing it, but it's got to be done. And in that one, you know, we started to analyze the data, and we were realizing that this was an overwhelming process. Is there some way that we could just simply customize a process, turn it into a process that was somehow standardized? One of the things that we did learn, and this was a little bit alarming, is that there was a lot of professionals that were not including financial disclosures in their process, which was a little bit amazing to us, but definitely walking the clients through a financial disclosure process. And just to give you a quick overview of what that one looks like, this allows clients to actually go through an intuitive, again, we stole that process from our triage, an interview that automatically generates a document list. The clients are nudged to load their documents and fill in a value. The client submits that value for a professional review. And what happens is the client's to-do list goes over to a professional to-do list. The professional is nudged to review that document, and they have the option, obviously, as they go through that process, they're going through and they are obviously generating whether or not this is the right document, is this the right dates, is this the right accounts, whatever this might be, and they can now mark that document as complete. What happens again is ultimately what happens is that document will either go to the completed file or it's returned to the client. Again, we talk about implication nuggets. We had this wonderful implication nugget on this one. Our office, we shut down the office every year between Christmas and New Year's. We shut it down, we all go home and we stay in our pajamas. And in this one, we were trying to get ready for Christmas last year. And typically in our mediation office, the individual that was dealing with financial disclosure was taking a Friday afternoon and doing the financial disclosure. So he logged onto his platform, he saw his professional to-do list, and he went in and cleared off his to-do list. He had 36 things to do for this client, 26 things to do for this client, cleared them off, and cleared off the process. What was interesting though is an hour later, he was being notified by the system that the clients had added another 36 documents, and the other client had added 22 documents, and another client had added 13 documents. So he logged back in and he took 10 minutes and cleared off the documents again. And again, within an hour, we were being notified that clients were loading more documents again. What we started to realize is that the clients were noticing that somebody was on the other end of the computer. They were noticing that they were not just loading documents or sending them through to a Dropbox or emailing them off to somebody or to just sit in a file somewhere until they were being notified, but something was actually happening with their documents. And this was nudging clients to actually complete the process faster. Financial disclosure, obviously, is our key process. We have now walked over 500 individual clients, and this means clients that are the clients of lawyers and mediators and financial professionals. This is their clients. We've successfully walked over 500 clients through that entire process. But this is what we started learning about process. You know, you take all of these different and individual pain point solutions that we're creating, and you start gluing them together and you start creating process efficiencies. And this was really interesting. You know, that really wasn't our goal to create process efficiencies necessarily. Obviously, there was a call for process efficiencies. Clients most certainly want process efficiencies. One of the things that we noticed just with financial disclosure alone is that our data was coming back that for the typical processes that was happening in a lawyer's office or what was happening in a court process, whatever it might be, an attorney's office, a mediator's process, we found that typically to get them to the start to the finish of a financial disclosure process was typically happening between 70 and 100 days. That's how long it was taking. By the time the documents came in, the clients would send you a list of documents. 30% of the documents were wrong. You had to go through them all, send them back. The clients would promise to have the right documents to you by Monday. 3 weeks later, the clients would send you another batch of documents that were wrong. And unfortunately, the person that was responsible for reviewing those documents had to start from the beginning again. In our processes, we started gluing together the negotiation room and the collaborative process and the financial disclosure process. We created a financial disclosure process where now we are actually seeing clients complete their entire financial disclosure process from the initial intake interview to the generation of the net family property statement. We're seeing it happen in 7 to 12 days. Now, again, this started revealing incredibly wonderful other kind of understanding implication nuggets. You know, we started realizing, our mediators started phoning us up and saying, do you realize how much drama we've cut off my file when clients are not taking 100 days to complete their financial disclosure, when we're actually able to get these clients into their mediation process within a week or 2 weeks because the financial disclosures are all done and ready to go and packaged nicely? Do you realize how much drama we're cutting off? The other thing that we started to hear back from our financial professionals and then directly from clients is especially, and I'll use the example of women. In many families, it's not unusual that one person is responsible for the finances and another person really doesn't know what's going on with the finances. And many times we were finding that there were women that were trying to get their head wrapped around their financial decisions and their financial understandings because they were having to make some of the most important decisions of their entire lifetime in this separation process. The challenge, of course, is it's really difficult to get your head wrapped around your finances, to truly understand everything that's coming in and everything that's going out, if it's taking you 3 months to gather all of this information. It really is difficult to be able to process that information together in such a way that you can start to make these financial decisions. What we started to realize by creating a process efficiency, we were dealing with an innate power imbalance, that we were actually helping people to grasp their financial situations very, very differently. And that was one of those wonderful things that we were truly looking for by implementing technology, was to deal with a pain point, which was a power imbalance of understanding money. Well, this started to reveal to us other kinds of power imbalances, or sorry, other kinds of potential, oh my goodness, my PowerPoint, other kinds of scenarios where we wanted to be able to deal with this data that was coming into us. And we started realizing the potential, for instance, of naturally dovetailing with other parts of this entire process. For instance, when we are, I'm sorry, my PowerPoint has got a demon of its own. when we are dealing with individuals that are going through, for instance, a financial disclosure process, you start to realize that this is the same information that is required, for instance, for their mortgage. And a huge pain point that was coming out to clients was that we were dealing with individuals that, for instance, they were getting into separations agreements and they were no longer qualifying for mortgages just simply because of the way that it was negotiated. So in other words, because of the way that the separation of alimony or child support or spousal support was negotiated, their debt service ratios were disqualifying them from mortgages. And we really started to understand that we could implement into these processes very connecting abilities to be able to connect people not only to mortgages, but also, for instance, to their tax implications, or implement them, for instance, with regards to retirement planning or financial planning. Those processes are all requiring the exact same documents. And we realize that as clients are going through this process, for instance, with financial disclosure, there's very few times in your entire life that you're having to do a full financial reckoning like you are in a separation process. You actually have to know what's coming in and what's going out. And we realized that we were in a position to actually assist not only the clients, but the professionals working with those clients to connect them to other processes later down in the process. Obviously, when we start now talking about collaborating, adding a mortgage broker, adding a tax planner, adding a financial planner onto the collaborative list of professionals working on the platform, we now started to realize there was an obvious dovetailing integration into the court processes. And in this one, we've been talking with Superior Court here in Ontario. They're talking about this one, huge frustrations, clients coming in, for instance, on their financial disclosure process, and they're being dropped off with a file folder 3 inches thick of financial documents that the clerk, clerk and the judge is being expected to review as they're going through a process.
I'm sorry, let me stop you for a second because we're getting a lot of background noise here. Let me take the host back and I'm going to mute Constanza and Mike. Okay, great. I think that solved it. Sorry, just wanted to make sure people could hear what you're saying. Okay, great, back to you.
And we realized very quickly the integration with regards to the court processes. Again, taking what it is that we've already created, taking that that platform that we've already created and redesigning it and repurposing so that it could be used in other capacities. In other words, if we are tracking the status of clients and individuals going through a separation process already, from their triage to their professional to a completed list, obviously we could extend that handshake and we could take various processes and extend a handshake to the court and ultimately on to the judge in whatever process that was going on in that entire process. What was really interesting with this one is we did a lot of research, and we've been following research with regards to procedural justice. I keep coming back to this concept that the research is showing on procedural justice. I know that when we look at court processes, we see it as a start to finish, and you need to understand that we are not lawyers, nor are we trying to be lawyers or judiciary. What we're interested in is the process that people are having to walk through that process. And what was coming out of that research was funding and an understanding that clients' conception of procedural justice was not determined by the outcome of their file, but rather by how the client perceives the process and how the client feels while that process was being implemented. So in other words, the research was coming back saying that clients needed to feel that they were being heard, that clients needed to feel that the process was encouraging transparency and even-handedness, that the process needed to feel, the clients needed to feel that the process was facilitating some measure of neutrality, and that clients needed to feel that there was a measure of dignity and respect built into the process. What we learned with this one is what we really needed to bring to the table at this point was not so much more information per se. We were really interested in, and we started to bring in from the local universities, the psychologists and the behavioral scientists and the legal designers, educators that understood how to convey information, UX, UI designers, and say to us, how do we help clients to feel heard using technology? How can we help clients to feel transparency? How can we help them to feel dignity? And that's what we've been looking at as part of the integrations into our core processes. It's also really important too that I say we understand that court processes are not necessarily just about a client going before a judge. Court processes also happen from and beyond the court. So that could include, you know, the mandatory intake processes that are a part of our court programs, mandatory mediation processes. Legal aid is definitely a part of that thought process. And we're even finding the extension to things right now, for instance, the family responsibilities and the registering of your separation agreement post where it is that you go through. When we're thinking dispute resolution on this one, we even go as far as to say, you know, we're realizing that a huge pain point for clients is just navigating through the court. Again, let's go back to our Google Maps. Literally, clients are saying, I need help to get to courtroom B down to the administrative offices. And surely there's got to be some way that we can navigate. Am I in the right line? Am I speaking to the right people? And then lastly, you know, with this one, I want to go one step further and just talk about the obvious implications that comes for this one. We've been doing a lot of data on self-represented litigants. And in this one, we've made a conscious decision that we are not trying to work with do-it-yourself divorces, as I've said online, but you know, the reality of self-represented litigants pops up in every area that we are working on, and it's an obvious pain point. Everything about it is unnecessarily difficult. And in that one, the pain point that we're hearing back from the clients is we need this to be a simplified process. So again, we are going back to our initial processes of triage, and we're saying, can we go through what we've learned? Can we learn about intuitive language again to ask questionnaires in a very different way? And as we're doing this research, you know, we started to realize that, of course, we can generate a document. This is not rocket science. Lots of people are generating documents. But the pain points is that the clients are coming back to us as they're saying, okay, you're generating this document, but what's a notional tax? And as you're generating this document, you know, what is capital gains? What is a realtor fee? And more importantly, where do I stick it? And then, of course, we obviously in that process wanted to make it available. And that's dovetail with existing processes. And we went back to our collaborative process for clients that were looking for a help button. And we implemented this and tied into unbundled services, those that were providing various services. Can it be possible that for these self-represented litigants, not necessarily going through a court, but for instance, that are in the process right now of speaking with the Family Responsibilities Office, can we easily connect to them with their existing data, their existing information, their existing financial disclosure, their existing court documents? Can we easily connect them to other professionals that could be made available to them? Again, repurposing processes. And I know I talk a lot, and I'm just going to get to the end of this process, and I want to take a moment just to talk about data. Data has been a really interesting researching point for us over the last 4 years. We spend a lot of time dealing with data. I'll be very honest, at the beginning, especially as we started with various different silos, this data was going into a great big warehouse and just sort of sitting there with nobody really sure what it was and where it was going. And you know, one of the big challenges when it comes to family law is there really is a lack of data when it comes to divorce and separation. I don't know what it's like in other jurisdictions. I do know Census Canada and Statistics Canada has stopped gathering data in 2011 with regards to divorce and separation in Ontario. And in that one, you know, the reality is even if they are gathering data, that doesn't necessarily speak to scenarios where people are breaking up in common law. They might be separating, but not necessarily divorcing. And so the data was very difficult to even make sense of. More frustrating is that we were hearing data that was coming to us, and when we would look and say, well, where are you basing this on? And it was coming from our research on 28 clients, or it was coming from a paper where somebody spoke to 15 people that were going through a divorce process. Well, it's very hard to data and to analyze that data with such small statistics. We finally got to the place where we started gathering the data that we were getting from triage processes and from various capacities that were going through the system. And we really started to get incredible amounts of data that as we started gluing them together under our Odin process, when you started to gather this data together, and we have data right now on close to 10,000 individuals that are researching or facing divorce in Ontario in the last 2 years. But this is not huge. I'm not going to make the claim that this is massive amounts of data, but I can pretty much guarantee there's not too many people around the world that have 10,000 clients that they have this much data on. And what we learned was all kinds of interesting tidbits, not making any claims on that data, but you know, we started seeing things that just really started to intrigue us. So, you know, we started seeing data that was coming out of, you know, this data that we're gathering, and we're not trying to conclude on it yet. We were just seeing data. And we were seeing that, you know, for instance, that things like income was not necessarily tied to the process that people were choosing. You know, it was really interesting that we started to realize that the higher the income, the more inclined that individuals were looking at do-it-yourself and self-represented litigants. Of the data research that we found, self-represented litigants are the ones that went through our process, and I have to put that caveat on it. You know, we saw that their income for those that were actually choosing self-represented litigant processes typically had income on the vast majority of greater than $150,000 per year. This was mind-boggling to us. But we really started to getting a sense of where clients were coming from and what was leading them to end up in do-it-yourself processes, litigation processes, collaborative processes, mediation processes, whatever it might be. But you can also use data to analyze client patterns, and that's where we are really interested. That's where we're looking and going forward. It's the pain points that are on the table for us in 2020. And of course, when we're looking at pain points, we realize that pain points in data means that we've got to be very involved with what's happening with data. I greatly appreciate that there's a lot of people concerned about data right now, and it's rightly so. I greatly appreciate the conversations with regards to ethics and regulations that I hear happening. The challenge for us, of course, is those regulations, that implementation is not happening fast enough for us. We are in startup mode, we are in sprint mode, we are in agile mode. And to be very honest, I often feel like we're moving much faster when it comes to data than the regulators are. Now, we certainly want to work with them. We're not in opposition to it, but it has meant that we have had to do some self-regulation. And in this one, we are working on how we are anonymization of data. And for us, just really simplifying that one, that means that we're working right now on randomizing and introducing noise into our data so that it cannot identify personal information, getting rid of personal information and just keeping analytical data. We're also interested, obviously, when it comes to instituting ranges. So in other words, we try to start gathering data on clients instead of saying I am 52 years old, born in August of 1965 or whatever it is, 67, I guess. We can actually institute data in a better way by saying, what is your age group? I'm between 50 and 53, I'm between 53 and whatever else. And gathering data so that it can be used for the greater good by anonymizing it and generalizing those ranges of data. And of course, with the data, we're also working very hard in encouraging consent. We're very much working on building confidence with the people that are working for our processes, and that's being done through transparency. Ultimately, what this means, though, is when we're looking at data, this is where I get all kinds of excited. Take me out for coffee and I will talk your ears off, because we're starting to realize that this data is revealing patterns to us. And we've spent a number of years right now, for instance, understanding that there are parenting patterns with regards to things like children and the way parents are dealing with children. And we're realizing that data analytics and data scientists are helping us right now to suggest solutions for parenting plans. So I'm not talking legal clauses, I'm talking about a solution that somebody can draft a legal clause around later on. We're realizing that natural language processing, it is just wonderful what we're seeing happening in natural language processing right now. It's working with tonal intonation and it's capturing emotional sentiment that we're able to change the way that people are receiving information. But where this is really exciting for us is we are now working with individuals that are realizing that individuals going through, for instance, domestic violence situations have a particular data set, a language pattern that identifies them as a red flag for somebody going through a domestic violence situation. And we're realizing now that this data married together with data analytics and natural language processing is helping us to capture and red flag individuals for domestic violence screening. Same thing is playing out right now where we're seeing this data play out. This is again coming from the healthcare industry of red flagging individuals that have, for instance, personality disorders, borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, very prominent when it comes to family law processes. And where we're interested in this one is, can this data help us to change the way that we would present this information to somebody that has a borderline personality or narcissistic personality process. Ultimately, that gives you a real quick overview of the work that we've been doing in the last 4 years with CSD and our Odin platform. Again, just so you know, with regards to this one, we work with other people. we are very adamant. If you are working with an online dispute resolution platform, if you are working with, a parenting, a co-parenting platform, we are very interested in working with other individuals. We're very interested in how we can take those individual pain points, marry them together on an online dispute resolution process, and one by one break down this complexity and play it out into a larger process. Very much we see some of these individuals that are creating the online processes, the ODR processes, the bigger processes, as the ones that are navigating the way to the moon. They're the NASAs, and we salute you because you're doing wonderful work. We are the individuals that deal with those pain points. I always tell people, we are the people of NASA that deals with how astronauts eat in space and the heat shields or whatever else that might be a part of the process. So if you're working in family law, or if you're working in dispute resolution processes for family law, we're definitely interested in talking to you. Really quickly, if you got to put a plug in there. And again, lastly, folks, again, my name is Darren Gingras. I am with CSD Dispute Resolutions. We are out of Toronto, Ontario. There's my email address. Please do get in touch with us. We love to communicate with other people. We talk to people all over the world all the time, and we'd love to know what it is that you're doing and how we can be a part of it.
Darren, thank you so much. That was excellent. One of the challenges is everybody's muted, so you can't hear the round of applause at the end. But that was incredible, incredible. What a great presentation, and it's amazing how comprehensive the work is that you're doing. Sometimes, yeah, Nora says she's clapping here as well. That's what she gets.
Thank you.
The blinking.
Absolutely excellent.
Yeah, thank you, Mirez. Yeah, I mean, it was amazing. It's really, really incredible and so comprehensive. I mean, I think I really love the expansive view you take on this work. I think a lot of people often focus on one note in the symphony, but I really feel like you've got a very comprehensive perspective on the work that you're doing. So that was great. And I know lots of people have questions they might want to raise, but I loved your slide about, first of all, I do feel like sometimes I'm the kid with the rocket on his back, sliding along on my belly, on the skateboard. Sometimes that's the way innovation works. It's not always big leaps ahead. Sometimes you really do got to grind it out. But I love your slide on procedural justice and the 4 components that you identified, that people feel that they're heard, that they feel the process has even-handedness, that it facilitated neutrality, and that it has a measure of dignity and respect. And for me, I love how that permeates everything that you're doing, thinking expansively about how can you communicate that sense of procedural justice. And, I think that's one of the things that I hear that's becoming a theme of this week is people are nervous that technology is going to weaken that sense of procedural justice because people aren't going to feel so heard. They're not going to feel that connection with another person, that technology is somehow dehumanizing the process and it's removing some of those key components. And I was just wondering if you would talk to that, because that's just a theme I feel people are very interested in this week.
And just to give credit to that quote, that's coming from our good friend Nancy Welsh, talking about procedural justice and some of her work. What we've learned on this one, very graciously, I think what I would probably say to anybody, especially when we're talking family law, I often wish that we had got into, that somehow we got bitten with the bug of ODR when it comes to, college disputes with regards to your marks. I don't know why we picked family law. We kind of decided to go for the gold, the gold star of drama.
Yeah, that's like the toughest one.
So. And, in that one of the things that we've really been pleased with is the feedback that we're getting from the professionals that we're working with. And in this one, there's been a number of early adopters, a number of large firms, a number of organizations that have come to us and said, no, you know what, we're going to work with you through all the bugs. And I do need to assure you, we've had a million bugs along the process and they've stuck with us. When we can actually get to that place where we work through it, what becomes interesting then is we can actually start understanding what's really going on. What's the question behind the question?
Sure.
If anything we know in family law, it's never what we're dealing with on the table. The process, the drama that's going on is I'm not finished spanking you yet. Or the drama that's going on in the process is I am, anxious about what's happening with money, or I'm still angry with you for something that happened in Christmas 2005. And what we're realizing with this one, and what the people that we're working with are realizing, is that technology actually has the ability to deal with these things.
Yeah.
We received a call this week from a lady that is working with parental alienation and reintegration of children into their processes. And she was telling us that her research, this was a university, her research was saying that they have found that individuals going through screening processes online were much more inclined to be honest and straightforward than they were if they were doing this into a face-to-face process. Now, that doesn't mean one's better than another. That's just really interesting information.
Fascinating, fascinating.
And that's what we become intrigued in. I am not interested in creating a process for the sake of just putting it online. I'm interested in the end user and that client. And folks, if we are not creating a process that deals with disputes and humanizes individuals,
absolutely,
it doesn't matter what it is that we're doing.
Well, and can I ask you to stop sharing your screen, because I want your video to come full screen again so that everybody can see your beautiful, handsome face. But again, it's about humanizing the technology. I couldn't agree more. And one of the things that I hear, again, as a theme is technology tries to put people into little boxes. You know, it's sort of like, okay, well, here's your dispute, fill out this form and tell us about it. But as you're saying, so much of the lived experience of a dispute, it's emotional. It's so human. And I think there is a way for us, and I think you may have just said this, we need to humanize the technology. We can't let the technology dehumanize us. In a sense, there's a tension between these two things, the efficiency and then the emotional reality connection with the psychology of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's very important to realize as well, and we know this from our own mediation process, that to assume that, you know, processes that are human run are necessarily humanized.
Yeah.
You know, the reality is clients might be stopping by our office, or they might be calling us, but if they can't reach us, they're frustrated. This throws the angst. They might be emailing us, but we're busy in, you know, court, we're busy in wherever, and they're getting upset with us, and that's just adding to our drama. So the assumption that people are necessarily humanizing processes is not necessarily correct either.
Well, I agree with that. Go to the DMV and you'll see a dehumanizing in-person process. Yeah. So, well, I want to open it up to others. Do others have questions that they want to put to Darren about his presentation? I saw you got some kudos in the chat here. Nora said she's clapping here. It's truly a whole system view. And Diego says, congrats, Darren. Andrea says, excellent, thoughtful, thank you. So I know Vinicius was sending me lots of messages. He needed to head out because he's in Brazil. So it's getting late there, but he was really very impressed with your platform too. So any other questions for Darren about the substance of what he shared?
Who cuts your hair? Well,
I want to know where you got the jacket, actually. So Nora says, what's the cost for families?
So obviously, you know, we are not involved in direct-to-consumer processes in any way. So we are now only facilitating our processes with individual professionals. And that's just a decision of what it is that we're doing at this time. We're not wanting, to be very honest, direct-to-consumer processes right now, I'm very concerned that it will confuse the conversations that are happening. And I'm not sure if it's necessarily the priority. I have no problem saying it is a huge business opportunity waiting for somebody.
Sure.
But the reality with that one is that's just not where we're wanting to be. So in that one, our real concern when it comes to families is obviously we are providing services directly to professionals.
Right.
And what we say to them is we're very interested in how you can minimize expenses. You can minimize your costs. And in that one, if we can make it so that you are still receiving the same net profit of what it is that you're doing on a process, can we potentially drop the gross cost of what it's costing your client? And that's where we're shooting towards.
You know, I love that. One of the things that I think is very important, people always say to me, oh, well, you're eliminating mediators from the process. You're just going to create these robo-mediators. And I said, that's the opposite of what I want to do. Absolutely. I want to get many, many more mediations in the system, more work for mediators. It makes me think almost of like the pharmaceutical companies. You know, they used to only inform doctors about their drugs. And then the doctors were the ones who talked to the patients about it. But then the pharmaceutical companies just started, I don't know if they do this in Canada, but in the US, a couple of years ago, they started putting their own commercials on TV. And the thing is, when you're selling direct to consumers, things like drugs, it's complicated. All the different, you know, you can't combine these two drugs and there may be side effects and all these things. So I really feel like the role, just like doctors are necessary in the medical side of the field, I think that mediators are necessary in this side of the field too. I want to build tools that I put in mediator toolboxes. but I still need the mediators to use the tools. It's not about me creating tools and then cutting the mediators out and then going to the disputants and then saying, hey, how do you want these mediation tools? Because they're not going to know what to use. And sometimes they're not well positioned to utilize them effectively either. So,
well, you're also identifying an obvious key point, and maybe we'll close on this one. Identifying a key point that we're finding right now in the adoption of new processes and innovations, access to justice, et cetera, and family law processes, is that people are misunderstanding in that process the role of what technology is hoping to do. So that's a pain point in and of itself.
Sure.
The way that I typically try to explain it to professionals is if we were to look again at the healthcare industry, we realize that the healthcare industry is not built around just doctors and surgeons.
Right.
We understand that the entire healthcare industry is also built with nurses and care providers and triage individuals and cleaners and restaurants and whatever else. Much the same when we move over to the legal industry and certain family law processes, we're realizing that the family law process is very much built around numerous other professionals as well.
Absolutely.
Just as surely as healthcare technology has not driven doctors and surgeons out of business, neither will legal technology drive lawyers, mediators, and financial professionals out of business.
Amen. Amen. And that's so well said. I'm tempted to make it the last word, but you know me, I'm such a loud talker. I can't resist. At the Williamsburg conference, Dino Himonis, who did the keynote, he talked about the legal system has been, law schools in particular, they've been turning out the legal equivalent of thoracic surgeons and then saying the only people that can deliver medical services are thoracic surgeons. And that's not the way to think about it. He said, we need to be deputizing ministers and social workers and, all of these different people and empowering them to deliver some levels of legal service. Because, right now we only have the thoracic surgeons who are qualified to do it. They're too expensive and, and the parties can't afford them. So essentially we don't have a solution. So I agree with you. The idea of creating an army of people who have these tools and have the expertise necessary to deliver services where it is. I mean, to think that you could go to your temple and your rabbi could have access to some of these tools. For some people, that's the only way they're going to get access to them. So you're singing my song, my friend. I was enthusiastic before. Yeah. Andrea says, hallelujah. And Diego says, about humanizing the technology, I agree a lot. So you have the amen chorus from the entire globe right now with you, Darren. So,
fantastic.
So this was great. Thank you so much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. And we've recorded the session, so I'm going to edit the video tonight and we'll post it. But this was really wonderful. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to be eager to see your presentation, even though they might not have been able to join us live.
Thanks for letting us showcase what it is that we do.
Great. You bet. Thanks a lot, Darren. Okay. And with that, we'll wrap it. Thank you, Merez. Thank you, Nora. And have a good night, everyone. And hopefully you can tune in tomorrow. We got a lot more great sessions going tomorrow in Cyberweek. Okay. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.